just wanted to let you know that we're going to just wait a few minutes because we heard the traffic was really bad coming in. So we'll get started shortly. Welcome, and thank you for your patience. We were just trying to see if anyone was coming in a little bit late. Of course, anyone can join us if they are, but tonight is really special. We normally do not do um, any talks unless there's just a really good speaker that pops up, and that's what happened in this case. Jessica Dawson and Tracy Butcher are here from the Virginia, Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust, and they are only available at this time of the year. And so we picked a date, and we are delighted that you have come to hear their wonderful story. How do you protect the wildlife in Africa from poaching when there's so much demand in other countries for rhino horns, all of these things, and how do you protect the community that needs to live with the wildlife? And they have a blueprint for us. And so I think we're going to get to learn about that and so much more. Tracy Butcher is going to introduce our speaker, Jessica Dawson. Tracy is the U.S. Outreach and Development representative of the Wildlife Fund. Thank you all for coming. We'll have Q&A afterwards.
Thank you, Charlotte. Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Butcher. Thank you very much for coming out to see us. I know it's a hectic time of the year, and we really appreciate the effort you've gone to. Before I introduce Jessica, I'd love to thank John Hine for inspiring this gathering and introducing us to the wonderful people here at Wayne Community College Foundation. They've been absolutely so kind and helpful organizing this and helping to promote it, and it was a great idea. We're really pleased to be here, and we're very grateful for, to you, John, and to all of you here at the University Foundation. So I'm going to introduce Jessica Dawson. Jessica is our executive director. She's been our illustrious leader since the inception of Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust. She drives this organization, and I met Jessica and the trust. I lived in Zimbabwe for 15 years and was doing wildlife biology and working in the safari business. And I met the founders of the trust through my years of experience there, and went back to visit, and was talking to some of their board trustees, and discovered that they had put together this amazing organization, and Jessica had really brought it to be, in my humble opinion, the most effective, holistic, groundbreaking organization working in Southern Africa. And you will find out why for yourself shortly, but they do everything on a very lean budget. They're very, very effective, and they are, at the heart, they are the most dedicated conservationists that I've known, and I've known some of the greats. So I'm really proud to work for them. I'm really happy to introduce Jessica and enjoy it, and we'll have questions afterwards, and we will be here to hand out information, and if you'd like to learn more about our organization, we're happy to stay in touch. Oh, excuse me. Okay, and without further ado, this is Jessica.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for making the time this evening to come down here. We really do appreciate it, and thank you, Charlotte and John, for organizing and helping set up this event. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask a bit more at the end. I'm going to go through and just give you a bit more information about our organization and our projects and who we are and what we do. And then, again, if you have any more questions, just let us know at the end. Tracy doesn't do herself credit. She's a wealth of knowledge about conservation, both in Africa and in the United States. So if you do have other questions that you might think of after the presentation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and feel free to ask us. So as Tracy mentioned, the Trust has been going for 15 years now. Back in 2008, we were started by a group of people who felt more needed to be done for conservation in Victoria Falls and extended that into the Southern African region. So our mission as an organization is to promote conservation throughout that area through the sustainable use of resources. And that includes our human resources in the communities that we work with. So who we are, we're a team of 32 people as of now. These are some of the people that are involved in our day-to-day operations, including some of our veterinarians and managers, and the people involved in the ground, on the community side of things, as well as with education, and in our laboratory, which I'll touch on in a bit more. So as Tracy mentioned, she met some of our board when she first came out and came to join us, and was inspired to be our U.S. representative, which we're very fortunate about. And when we started back in 2008, these two good people here were at the heart of what we did. Our organization has grown a lot since then and shifted. But we started off as an organization that felt that we needed to do more regionally, especially on the education side, and dealing with, at that time in 2008, if you know anything about Zimbabwe, the poaching crisis that we were facing at that time due to inflation. That, fortunately, inflation has shifted, and our team and our mission has shifted as well, and we've grown into it. Our board is a group of people that are all involved in various aspects of conservation, from tourism to ecology, as well as a range of activities from guiding and finance and business in the region. They all have conservation deep at their heart, as do all of our staff. How many of you guys have been to Africa before? Show of hands. Oh, a few of you. Okay. Just to give you guys a bit of basic information about geography, we're situated in Victoria Falls, which is centered here, what's known as the four corners of Africa, or the 4 countries. And back in about 2010, we were working together with a group of organizations to set up what's known as a trans-frontier conservation area. So this basically means that we recognize that conservation extends beyond political boundaries, and therefore there's a need to have harmonization between different countries on the way wildlife and natural resources are shared. So what is now known as the Kaza TFCA, the Kavango Zambezi, named for some of the rivers that flow through the Trans-Frontier Conservation Area, was established. The TFCA includes 5 countries, not 4. It includes Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, Angola, and Zambia. And it includes 520,000 square kilometers of land, as well as 2.5 million people and all of their livestock. This TFCA was created because it's home to over 220,000 elephant, savanna elephant. And if you look at those numbers at the recent survey that was just announced at the end of August in this year, those numbers are really significant in that the majority of the elephant are situated in this area between Botswana and Zimbabwe. Between our 2 countries, we've got more than 86% of the total population. And that leads to some challenges when you live alongside some of these mega herbivores. And it means we need a regional approach to conservation. You can't do it in a standalone fashion. So I'll touch on that a little bit more. But suffice it to say that the main reason that this Trans-Frontier Conservation Area was established is significant because of the elephant population that goes between these 5 countries. The Trust runs on average about 15 projects a year. It's really focused under the pillars of wildlife rescue and rehabilitation, wildlife research. We have a wildlife forensics and disease laboratory that also does a bit of wildlife crime investigation, dealing with human-wildlife conflict and looking at sustainable solutions for some of our community livelihoods, and working with school children on education and outreach. While we have these pillars, it's important to note that they are not standalone, they're all interlinked, and that we really focus on what's known as a One Health approach in trying to manage our efforts together, and realizing that they are all interlinked with one another. It isn't independent. On the wildlife rescue and rehabilitation side, I mentioned back in 2008 we had a significant poaching problem, and we managed to get on top of it. Most of that was, at the time, was dealing with bushmeat poaching. We were doing over 50 animals in about 6 months of time to remove wire snares. You guys all know what a snare is? Okay. To take off snares from the different species of wildlife. The challenge with snaring is that it doesn't discriminate. It affects all different species, and you end up spending quite a bit of time trying to remove the wire snares and catch up with the various animals that have been affected. At that time, we were seeing high unemployment rates. They were over 80%. And so the poverty factor was significantly affecting our ability in being able to stay on top of the poaching. You can see that over time, the poaching was able to decrease, and then with the onslaught of COVID, due to the lack of tourism in the area, then we had a spike in poaching. This year, we're probably on par with 2022. I think we were about 40 snare removals at last month when I checked, so it has still remained high. We have also extended the reach into where we go to take off some of the snares. And of course, as you grow, more people hear about you and they ask you to come and assist when they do see something that they need assistance with. We're really fortunate. We have 2 wildlife veterinarians on our staff, as well as my husband, Roger, who has a dangerous drugs license, and on rare occasion myself, that will be able to go out, dart, and immobilize that animal, remove the wire snare, and release it. Almost all of the creatures that have a wire snare, we release straight away. That is ultimately our goal, is to be able to release back into the wild. As I mentioned before, we have a whole range of different creatures and species that are affected with snaring. It's not limited to just ungulates. We do a lot with carnivores. We have quite a range of research projects, which are helpful. Also, there's a lot of new technology that's at play that allows us to realize when we have snares. So everything from camera traps to obviously WhatsApp groups that let us know that when something's been seen, it's instantaneous now that we're told that there's a situation and are able to respond. So our reaction time is obviously much quicker to be able to come and deal with some of the situations. Elephant are always a tricky one. Being able to dart elephant, you have to immobilize if it's a calf. You have to immobilize both the mother and the calf. This is a video, so I'm trying to see if it's going to play for you guys. No. We have a problem. We'll go from there. All right. Not down. Sorry, the screen's frozen. Oh. Pardon, technology has interrupted here. We've got Microsoft Edge wanting to perform browsers updates or something. It's like a lasso. It's attached to a tree. So you get different types of snares. So they're usually used for subsistence poaching. So what happens is they're put out so that an impala or a warthog or a buffalo will walk through it. And then what will happen is that it will get caught around the neck of the animal or the leg, and that animal will eventually pass on, and then the poacher will come and take the meat, and that's food for the pot, or in some cases, with buffalo, it's sometimes for sale. So it's a challenge in that it doesn't affect just those species. So larger species in particular will break the snare off the tree that it's attached to, and it remains on the animal. So it's an issue, and of course then it gets tighter and tighter. So sometimes you'll see elephant with a severed trunk or legs, necks, you name it, they get attached. Even baboons, you would think most of the time they're able to remove them. But sometimes even the baboons are not able to. Excuse me. Sorry, this isn't playing on the screen. Can you just help me? So, as I mentioned, snaring affects everything, and it starts off often as a subsistence means of poaching, and then often it grows because of the need for income, and then you end up with the slippery slope of becoming a commercial poacher. So that said, we will always respond to all cases that we're called out to, and then a large number of what we get called for nowadays is dealing with cases that have been interfered with by humans. So on the rescue and rehabilitation side, we have got a rehabilitation facility on site. That is for creatures that have come in solely because they've been in a situation in which humans have placed them. So we get a lot of animals that come in that have been hit by vehicles, quite a few that are, lots of birds that get either hit by vehicles, electric fences, quite a range of things that are injured through various situations. The porcupine there, we had like 100 mils of rain, the first rains last year, and it got washed on the storm drains and got stuck and separated, and despite efforts to locate its family, we were not successful. Sometimes we get called on cases from the rural community, which is a real benefit, in which we're able to respond. These are cases in which an animal is usually injured, and some of the community members have been able to stop the animal from being harmed by other community members. We also, this one? This is an aardwolf. So it's actually an insectivorous animal. So it's in the hyena family. Yeah. This is a honey badger, in case if anyone knows the reputation of honey badgers. It was not our favorite rehabilitation case. Our veterinarian was not pleased with it, and he was very happy when it was released. So again, our goal, they must all go back into the wild. And then we do get cases of this creature. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah? It's a pangolin. So this is a Temminck's ground pangolin. So there were 8 species of pangolin. I've just been told there's a new species that was declared last month in Asia. There's 4 species in Africa, and where we are, we only get 1. This is the Temminck's ground pangolin, and it's the largest pangolin species. This is actually the most endangered, most trafficked mammal in the world. So it's a big challenge for us. They're not very common to see. I've never seen one in the wild in living there for 20 years. But we do get them coming in from the illegal wildlife trade, unfortunately. So to give you an idea of how vast the illegal wildlife trade is, 23 tons of pangolin and pangolin scales were confiscated out of one shipment out of Nigeria last year. It's massive. And it's not going away. It's a major challenge for those of us on the ground. We've seen a rise in the number of pangolin that are trafficked that come in to us. When we have a pangolin come into the rehab, it comes in through investigations. It's considered a specially protected animal. And so we have to hold that animal as evidence until the case goes to court. So it is a challenge. Pangolin are not an easy rehab animal. They get very stressed, and when they come into us, they're usually dehydrated, and they usually haven't fed for quite a long time. So they're not an easy species, as I mentioned, to rehabilitate. We're often able to work with investigations to get the judiciary to allow us to present the evidence, that the pangolin as evidence, and accept that with an affidavit as a pangolin for court, so that we can release it as soon as possible. The penalties currently for poaching pangolins are 9 years in prison. So it's a heavy sentence, but well worth it given the situation that we're in. We do work with other NGOs in the area to try and work efficiently and effectively to work together on all of the cases that come through our door. He's curled up. a little bit, they're a little bit like a armadillo, I would say, like here. So he's curled up, we're holding him. So when the pangolin feels threatened, they'll curl up in a ball. So if you do see them, if you're fortunate to ever see them in the wild, if you see carnivores trying to play around with them, they will always curl up in the ball. So these are scales that are made out of keratin. So they're a bit like your fingernails or toenails, a bit prehistoric. Sorry? Yeah, sure. Okay, so in the demand countries, pangolin are wanted for traditional medicine. So they are used, recognized as a product in some of the demand countries for everything from fever producers to producing milk, and in some cases they're wanted for their meat. So going back to the illegal wildlife trade, we always work together to try and enhance capacity to be able to combat the illegal wildlife trade and illegal wildlife trafficking. So our wildlife veterinarian, one of them, Dr. Foggin, our pathologist, and myself, train wildlife crime investigators up to what's known as a level 2 investigator on wildlife crime investigation, as well as on diseases, wildlife diseases and poisoning. And that's because if you live where we do and have our elephant populations in the dry season, which can extend from April onwards, we have a lot of diseases that will kill an elephant and look exactly the same as a poaching situation. So if you're a ranger on the ground and you are trying to ascertain if you have a crime scene or if you have a natural cause of death, one of the things you need to be able to do is to differentiate which is which, and then if you have a crime scene, not to contaminate it, but to be able to ensure that you secure the scene up to a point that the investigators can come on site and be able to collect evidence that will stand up in a court of law. So this is a mock crime scene that we've worked on to train some of our investigations. The Trust is a member of the African Wildlife Forensics Network. We are a member for both the laboratory as well as for our crime scene investigation training. So we work both in the lab to be able to combat wildlife crime, as well as in the field to capacitate many of the rangers and investigators that are in the area to be able to understand the difference. We've probably trained over 300 first responding rangers, veterinarians, and investigators in the last 5 years on being able to identify wildlife crime scenes and differentiate between diseases and poisoning. In the lab, on the forensic side, we do a number of tests to be able to assist with wildlife crime scene investigation. The biggest test we do is what's known as species identification. We will get a chain of custody that comes with a sample. In this case, it's usually dried meat, and investigations will say to us, we suspect that this is bush meat. Please can you tell us if it is, and if so, what species it is? And that's important because if you go to court, the penalties for prosecution are dependent upon what species of animal has been poached. So obviously, if you've poached an elephant, the penalty is going to be much higher than if you've poached an impala. But in order for this to stand up in a court of law, we have to be able to use DNA to be able to understand what species it is that the meat has come from. So this involves a process known as PCR. So we're very excited because we're about to finally get a sequencer, which allows us to be able to do the entire process in-house. Previously, we would do a DNA extraction and then amplify the DNA and then have to send it to Germany to be able to get a sequence back to match it for a species. Now we can do everything in-house with some assistance that has come through from some US donors that we're very excited about to be able to start in the new year. The other tests that we're working on in our lab is that we've set up and developed a geographic origin of ivory test. So if we have a situation in which ivory is confiscated, we have taken samples of elephant from different populations of Zimbabwe and validated those samples to look at differences in DNA of those different populations. Does that make sense? And then with the ivory, we will take a sample out of it and try and match it to which population it came from. Okay, this isn't really used for court. The court doesn't really care where the ivories come from. It's to help investigations to understand what's happening with poaching and to be able to make a difference on the ground, as well as to link individuals that might be involved in poaching cases and to try and enhance investigations and conservation management in different areas and inform decisions on the ground. We've also just started a process. We've had a rise in the poaching of lion, especially claws and bones in the recent times. So we've developed what's known as a SNP panel. It's a genetics panel that allows us to map different lions back to individuals, as well as look at the genetic variation of different populations. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. On the disease side of things, we're very, very fortunate in that our wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Foggen, was in government for many years, and he helped run what's known as the wildlife unit. And when he left government, he very kindly came and joined us and our lab, and he's a very well-renowned pathologist and has a wealth of knowledge on diseases as well as with immobilization. So we've been able to scale up our laboratory significantly, and we do quite a range of testing for different types of diseases. A lot of these are zoonotic diseases. We're all much more in the know since COVID about some of these terms. And those are, of course, important because where we are, we're very close to the interface where people, wildlife, and domestic animals live together, especially in our rural communities. So being able to understand what diseases are circulating and try and either prevent or mitigate the transmission is critical for having healthy communities, but also our healthy animal populations, which are all interlinked. So these are a couple of cases that we've had. So this was a poisoning case. For us, malicious poisoning is on the rise. We have it specifically targeting elephant for ivory. So poachers have learned that they don't really need to use a rifle to target elephant. They can use a toxin and not have to take the risk. And then what happens is, of course, everything else that might feed off of that carcass is then too affected. So this was a case with some ducks. They're actually poisoned across the river in Zambia and then flew into Zimbabwe and died in Zimbabwe. So the grain that they had eaten was poisoned, and they were actually being sold as meat. I don't know who would want to eat them, but yeah. So this was a transboundary criminal case that we were involved in. And then these two creatures, this is obviously a lioness, and this is what's known as a banded mongoose. They are both infected with TB. So I'm sure you've heard of TB in the human form. We do have the human form. It's quite common where we are, but we also have different strains of TB. So this is a novel type of TB with the mongoose called Mycobacterium mungi. We do not know if it can transmit across species at this time. It's not a lot known about it. And this lion, unfortunately, was affected with TB, and we're not too sure what strain it is. We suspect it's likely bovis, which comes from livestock, but can be infected with buffalo. To give you a bit of an idea about a recent case we had, I'm not sure if you watched the news last month, but in 2020, we had, Botswana first had about 300 elephants that passed away in the Okavango Delta region. And then that was in about April of 2020. And then at the end of August, we had a really warm spell. And then it dropped off and got cold again. And we lost, over the course of a month, we found about 37 elephant in the Victoria Falls area that all died. They were all pretty young, less than 20 years of age, but not really young, not the nursing calves. And being fortunate to have Dr. Foggen, we were able to take samples. And with the heat, we thought immediately it was anthrax, which we get every year this time of year. It lives in the soil, and with the heat coming on, we thought with the water still around, it was likely anthrax. And with the lab, we were able to test right away using DNA, and it was negative, and we kept testing, and it was negative. So we went back and did full postmortems on the animals, and what we were seeing is a novel disease at the end, and it's been in the news because we just had a paper published in Nature Communications in October highlighting what the disease was. And it's known as Biscard taxon 45. It doesn't have another name. But at the time when this occurred, it was interesting in that it looked like a hemorrhagic septicemia, and it was reminiscent of exactly the same disease that wiped out 200,000 saiga antelope in Kazakhstan back in 2015, I think. So with that, we didn't know how this was going to affect the elephant population, of which we have a very large number, and what to do to manage it, or what caused it. So the best we could do was put many of the same measures in place that we do with anthrax in trying to prevent transmission. We also didn't know if it was going to possibly jump species, and we're very fortunate that it didn't. And it was able to be contained rather quickly. The links for the article are online if you want to learn more. There's quite a few press that have come out and in the last month that have done more in-depth articles on, on the entire disease. But it just, again, highlights that when you live in this situation, it's very difficult to have an elephant die like this, which is out of season. You think it's going to be a disease like anthrax, and it's not. Then you think maybe it's poaching. Definitely wasn't poisoning. So if you're a ranger on the ground, these things are not always easy to understand, to be able to respond to and deal with, and then to be able to look at wide-scale management policies to be able to try and prevent the transmission. And you got to remember this was during COVID. Borders were not open. We couldn't send samples easily abroad to be able to identify what was going on. So in the end, a new novel disease found in savanna elephant. So the work we do does not just extend to wildlife. We also work with domestic animals. And going back to our One Health concept, one of the biggest challenges we've got is that because of the proximity of our wildlife populations to our communities, there's a very close interface with domestic animals. And dogs are a big reservoir host for some of these diseases and that can affect them and kill them, such as rabies. As well as distemper. So our best efforts to try and prevent losses of wildlife are to trying to vaccinate some of our domestic animals, because trying to vaccinate wildlife is not affordable nor very effective. So every year we work with our communities to vaccinate the dogs in sort of what we do is we ring vaccinate between the national park and the protected areas and the communities. So on average, we do about 2,000 dogs a year that we try and vaccinate for rabies and distemper, and then the organization also tries to incentivize the community to sterilize their dogs and the rare cat as much as possible to try and ensure that they have a long-term better livelihood and health. Livestock play a very big role in the culture, in African culture, and especially in Zimbabwe, where I mentioned back in 2008, where we had this hyperinflation. Livestock was everyone's bank account, and it really makes a big difference to the community in terms of their wealth, and it's one of the signs that you're well-to-do if you have livestock. It's also a source of people's income to be able to sell if they need to pay, school fees or a wedding or a funeral. So they play a critical role in local culture. So that said, we try and assist in looking at different diseases in livestock, again, to prevent the spillover. So remember the picture of the lion I showed you that had TB? Well, bovis can be also transmitted in livestock. So we want to make sure that our communities are healthy. So we try and also incentivize the people that have the livestock to protect them, but also to vaccinate them. So diseases like TB are prevented, but things like brucellosis, which can also affect people if you drink unpasteurized milk or eat uncooked meat. So to try and stop the transmission of those diseases is a large part of what we try and do. And I'll touch on livestock in just a little bit more in just a minute. Wildlife research is a critical component of what we do. We run a range of projects on 4 different species in particular. One of our big focuses is on vulture research. Vultures have this negative perception, a lot due to different cultures, but they are the janitors of our ecosystem, and we would be hard pushed if we were not able to look after them. We have 4 species of vultures that are found in our area, and all of them, unfortunately, have been in decline recently. This species that you see most commonly is the white-backed vulture. And the reason they are in decline, especially in our area, is primarily due to the use of toxins. So I showed you the ducks earlier. So vultures, obviously, if animals die due to toxins, they feed off of the carcass, they too get affected, and then they also die. Back in, I want to say 2019, we had a case along the Botswana border where we had some elephant that had been poisoned, and we lost 537 vultures in one go. So vultures mate for life, and they live for 50 years. So if you just look at the impact, and it was during the height of breeding season, so we continue to see the impacts of that poisoning incident for a couple years on down the line. So they are under threat. It's a big challenge. We get a lot of vultures that come in from poisoning, but also electrocution. We've just had one come in that was found in the gorge. She's blind in one eye. So trying to rehabilitate these creatures and then release them is really important to us. They play a major role in the ecosystem and the long-term, viability and health of all of us. One of the issues we have with vulture protection is our elephant population, which is very large. They continue to hammer some of the trees that vultures nest in. So vultures use the same nest site year after year, and they only have one, sometimes two chicks a year, or sometimes every other year. So trying to protect vulture nests is really important to us. So we've worked on looking at, we have a major colony along the Botswana border, and we've been able to use some mesh fencing to put high enough up to try and prevent elephant from ring barking the tree and killing the tree, which would eventually lead to the loss of that nest. This is an example of one of the vultures that we released. When we have the funding or the ability, we would try and put a tracking device on the animal to see about, its survivability after release and how it goes. So this bird was released here in Victoria Falls, and you can see it flew all the way over to Chobe National Park. This is in one go, so over 2 days. So it flew more than 100 kilometers. So these guys have wide ranges, so they're not just localized in one area, geographic area. So when we do have colonies that are breeding, it's really important to protect them. We're really fortunate. There's some new technology that's come out recently that uses AI. So some of the new tracking devices that we have, which are a little bit different than the previous ones, have satellite function. And so this one actually uses a cell tracker, so cell signal from the cell phones. But the satellite devices now are able to give us downloads so many times a day, and using an AI function, depending on if that bird is situated in the same place over time, it goes through a range of formulas to be able to spit out sort of a green, yellow, and red system. And a red flag lets us know immediately, sends us an alert that we need to go and try and check a GPS location. And that's a way of managing things like poaching, but also looking at disease ecology and possible bird mortality. So AI really does help us in terms of being able to look at population management in some ways. One of the other species that we work on is lion. So we work together with a range of partners regionally through the CASA Animal Health Sub-Working Group, through the CASA Carnivore Conservation Working Group, and on the lion population. We're really fortunate where we're based. We have more than 2,000 lion in the population. So if you go back to that map I showed you of CASA, that's contiguous with Botswana. So it's one of 6 remaining meta populations of lion. And so we need to work hard with our neighbors to try and conserve it. And this goes back to having harmonization of policies and working together to try and find ways to be able to enhance populations of lion. Lion's main threat, of course, are habitat loss, and then human-wildlife conflict is another issue. And then recently we've had this threat of an increase in poaching for lions for their bones and their claws. One of the ways we identify lions is through whisker spots. So every cat has they're like a bit like cheetah with their spots, but whisker spots on the animal are unique to each and every individual. So we have a card, so we're able to identify individuals, and then we're able to use everybody in the tourism sector, both consumptive and non-consumptive, to be able to match individuals when we need to understand what's happening with some of our population dynamics. And so we have a database, so we're able to monitor population numbers, both in Zimbabwe, but as well as regionally, and that helps us understand what's happening with demographics of the animals, and look a bit more at some of the challenges that we're facing. Elephants, inevitably, we have to work with elephant. So they are a species that we collaborate with on research. We work with another organization called Connected Conservation. One of the biggest challenges we have with elephant is our shared water sources. So the Zambezi River, in our case, is one of the main ones, as well as the large number of pumped water holes that are in the area. With the local communities, we all have challenges with elephant crop raiding. So we fit satellite collars on elephant. We generally do this on bulls, and they're usually the younger bulls because those are the problem animals. And that's to be able to monitor where they move, to look at corridors, so to continue protection measures for moving elephant in certain areas is critical if we are going to look at large-scale population management, but also to look at what is effective as a deterrent when we have human-wildlife conflict. So with our communities that live along the boundary with elephant, here's a map to give you an idea. We look at what is effective in deterring them. So this is the national park right here, and if you look right here, this is all community, and you can see this guy's obviously been in the community causing some problems with crop raiding. So some of the tools we use to effectively deter elephant are what we call either passive mitigation or active mitigation. So passive mitigation with elephant involves the use of chili. So we take chili, we work with Connected Conservation. It's connected to the Tabasco family. So they grow chilies commercially and export them, and we take the ones that are not suitable and we grind it up, and we use that with the community to either burn chili bricks, which are mixed with dung, creates the smoke, keeps elephant out of the fields during crappie, or we use it to mix with wax and oil on string to be able to put along areas that we don't want elephant to go into. So it's quite an effective deterrent. Our aggressive deterrent is, it's effectively a potato gun that's been modified, and we don't use potatoes because elephants would eat them. We use a ping pong ball, and it's filled with a concentrated distilled chili oil. So if that elephant, it's usually at night, is crop raiding, we shoot out that ping pong ball, which sort of vaporizes chili oil. An elephant immediately will smell this, and they do not like the smell of chili. They also, elephant recognize that this is a hard boundary. This is actually a tar road that they've come across to crop raid. So there aren't any fences separating our communities from our wildlife areas. And that's important. So elephant know when they're in an area they're not supposed to be. Also, we have elephant that in Victoria Falls town are now urbanites. They don't go very far. They spend most of their time in town. So it's a challenge. We have lots of people that, walk to work or are out early in the morning exercising. So you have to be very careful when you're out and about. So they are an interesting species, one we have many of, but we need to find sustainable solutions to be able to live alongside them. So the research allows us the opportunity to look at effective ways to do that sustainably. Rhino management came to us through Dr. Foggen joining our team back in 2012. We were really fortunate to have him come on board, and with that, we ended up increasing our efforts with rhino conservation. So to give you a bit of background, and for those of you who don't know, rhino worldwide are on the decline. We have two species of rhino in the area we're in. We have the black rhino and the southern white rhino, just for simplicity's sake. They're really sought after for their horn, which is used for a variety of things in demand markets. Let me give you some more pictures. So we immobilize rhino every year. So we do this on both public and private estates. And we do this to, one, ear notch every new calf. So every new calf in every rhino in the country has a unique identification number that is ear notched, and that's so that the scouts on the ground can identify that animal daily if need be, and to be able to monitor the population. We also are able to, this doesn't show it. We take blood samples for genetics, but we also implant microchips into the animal in case they are poached. We're able to identify the animal even if the carcass is degraded, so we know exactly which animal it may be. The samples we take, we use to be able to run a genetics panel. So we're going to start a panel for black rhino starting next year. And this is a bit of the same as the lion panel, and that's to help us in understanding relatedness of the populations. We obviously have a lot less rhino than we do lion. And so in Zimbabwe, we're very fortunate in that our rhino population has been growing. We're over 1,000 rhino, both black and white rhino combined within the country, which is a great outcome for us. And we want to see that, continue to see that upward trend. So we will continue our efforts on being able to conserve the animals. And that does mean, in some cases on public land, we dehorn animals. So we do take the horn off. To do this, you have to be able to maintain it. That means you have to get you have to maintain it year on year. So we do dehorning in these areas every single year, and you have to get all of the animals, if possible, to take those horns off. The young bulls, in particular, they grow quite fast. The horn is made of keratin, so again, the same as your nails and your hair. So in order to be effective deterrent against poaching, we have to be able to do this annually. Human-wildlife conflict, I mentioned briefly earlier. So on the carnivore side, one of the most effective ways of mitigating conflict is actually to prevent it. So with livestock, it's the same areas that the elephant from that map we're crop rating. With livestock, our biggest effort is on prevention. Is anyone here a cattle rancher by any chance? No? Okay. So in our case, I mentioned we don't have any fences between our protected areas, our safari areas, our national parks, and our communities. And that said, the livestock also need to be able to access some of those protected areas for grazing, because they will not survive if they don't. So one of our biggest efforts is being able to protect those animals. So over the last 5 years, we've implemented these PVC mobile predator-proof, we call them bomas, you guys probably call them crawls. And what they do is they keep the livestock inside the crawl at night. They're very effective because lion hunt by sight, okay? So they will still come and they'll be able to smell the livestock, they'll be able to hear the livestock, but we've had 100% effectiveness with the bomas, and we have not lost a single head of livestock in 5 years. Touch wood, due to lion or hyena carnivore conflict. It's been a really great outcome. We have also had some significant benefits in terms of, with our increasing human population numbers, our human populations in Africa will double by 2050. And this is a problem for us in that we have many more people, but not as much space. And especially in our rural communities, with competition for resources and grazing land, we end up with overgrazed areas. So the outcomes with these mobile bomas is that we move them, depending on the number of livestock in them, we move them every 10 to 14 days if they've got 250 head of livestock. The bigger bomas, which we've just started using this year, which holds 500 to 600 head of livestock, we move those obviously less, every 5 to 7 days, and the soil fertility increases, okay, because it's high impact. You've got all the manure and the urine in there turning over very quickly. So in 2020, we ran a little pilot project where we gave maize seeds to all of the people that had their livestock in the bomas, and we said, plant half the seeds where you haven't had the boma and half the seeds where you have, and let's see what the outcome was. We were fortunate, we had good rain that year, and we had a 92% increase in cropping yields on the plots that had used the bomas. So it shows that there is an opportunity for significant livelihoods to be enhanced and food security for many people who often live along the poverty line and are quite marginalized and depend often on other people to be able to be sustainable. Oh, here's a look at the chili bomber. This is the potato gun that's been modified. So my husband's taken my running taser. So this is what ignites it. So if you look at the back here, what you do is you can either take it off, or if there's a hole at the back, we have different models. You can spray in an accelerant. So we use mosquito repellent. It's called Peaceful Sleep. You can use deodorant. Some places use hairspray. The ping pong ball sits here, and then with that in there, you light it with, you can use the taser or just a cigarette lighter, and then it's usually at night that that we have crop raiding, and when it happens, there's obviously there's a flash, there's it makes a loud noise when it comes out the barrel, it hits the animal, and then obviously it has a smell. So there's lots of senses involved with that, and obviously quite an experience, and it's quite effective. We don't just pass them out to everybody. We do have a trained team of community guardians who are trained on this. You obviously don't want to keep hitting the animal over and over again. It's only in certain situations that are safe that we use these to deter the animals off crop raiding situations, or if there's a safety situation. So I mentioned sustainable livelihoods as being a significant area that we're looking at and expanding into. So this is the outcome of the maize on that project for one farmer, which made a difference in being able to support families in the long term. We've now growing this project a little bit more with our livestock, and we've just initiated a pilot project where we've scaled up the number of livestock in the bomas, and that's not trying to have more livestock. It's trying to have the same number of livestock, but develop a value chain over time so that people are able to find a market for those livestock rather than keeping them until they're 13 or 14 years old, and there isn't one. It's been supported by our local brewery, the River Brewing Company. So when the brewing company ferments its grain, they very kindly give us the grain that's been fermented, and we take it and we dry it, and then we feed it back to the livestock in the bomas, especially this time of year when it's really dry. It's our summer now. Being able to try and keep the health of the livestock up is one of the things that we try and do. And then the farmers that are involved in this are able to also plant millet, and the brewery will buy back a little bit of the millet to be able to give them an income generation and ferment it back into the beer. So it's a small scale value chain that we've worked out with one of the local markets. In Victoria Falls, we have a large tourism market, and all of our beef either comes from outside of the country or from 500 to 1,000 kilometers away. So there is the opportunity to, over time, develop a value chain with local farmers to be able to have a farm-to-table sort of value chain using the bomas that support the income generation of some of our small-scale farmers in the long term. And then last year, we ran this little project. During COVID, we had a situation in that timber poaching was really getting out of hand with the lack of tourism and the cost, and a lot of people not having access to electricity. We were losing 2 tons of timber a day, which was massive. And we needed to do something to get on top of it. So we partnered with an organization that, I don't know if you can see this very well, develops these little stoves. So this is what's called a rocket stove, and it uses 80% less timber than what you would use on a traditional fire, three-stone fire in a day. And it doesn't use big logs, which is what most people normally use. It just uses twigs and sticks or grass. And it's obviously very fuel efficient. And then it has the added benefit in that obviously with the smoke not going into the house that comes from a major fire, there's a decline in many of the respiratory diseases that can affect especially women and children. It also is really helpful to us. I mentioned those elephants that are in town a lot. A lot of the women are responsible for gathering the wood that they need for the fire, and they puts them in constant contact with a lot of the elephant or the buffalo and creates conflict in our community and sometimes mortality. So by being able to have these rocket stoves, the need to do that is obviously much reduced, and we're able to have less losses of timber, but we also are able to have less losses of timber, as well as keeping communities a lot more sustainable and healthy. We've had some really great outcomes from this. Some of the women have developed using the stoves into a longer-term livelihood and selling the local traditional sadza, which is a maize-based forage for lunch, and they generate an income now. So they're obviously looking at being able to be way more sustainable down the line. So I think it's apt that we are here at an Institute of Education that I end on this note. One of our biggest programs is our community education and outreach. We firmly believe that the future of conservation relies on these guys. So if we are going to be effective in the long term, we have to work with our schools to be effective in the short term and medium term as well as the long term. So the Trust works to bring a group of school children out to our facilities every single week. So we bring a group of about 20 school children at one time, and then a couple of teachers. We see on average 700 to 1,000 children in a non-COVID year that are able to come out. They meet some of our wildlife ambassadors, as well as we talk about some of the challenges that they face living alongside wildlife. So that involves conflict, and then what to do when you do have conflict. How do you mitigate that conflict? Who do you speak to? And how do you find sustainable solutions to it? We also work in 5 schools on eco clubs, and this sort of came to us out of our efforts with the local rural district council. They were really having some challenges with some of the rural schools, with the children being able to pass their exams. So they asked us to assist. So we said, well, we will do what we can for science. So we've set up some after-school eco clubs in 5 schools, and our education director's taken the Zimbabwe school curriculum for science and developed a lesson plan for once a week. It's an hour club for a fun activity that's hands-on. So it's not just a lecture, it's trying to get the children to understand conservation in a broader scale and be involved in it in a hands-on way. So we obviously supplement this with some of our wildlife days. We have, International Vulture Awareness Day, World Wildlife Day, those types of things where we have some competition between the clubs to make it fun, and there's always a prize giving. So this is one of our projects for the long term. We realize we're not going to see lots of change initially, although we have. So like, for instance, pangolin that have been handed over to us, or some of the rehab cases that we get called in. We had one just the other day. We have a diker that's come in. It was attacked by, it was a baby diker. It was attacked by dogs. It was rescued by a community member, and then it's been brought in, and it's in the rehab, and it will soon go once it's ready to do so. This is Judge. She's our vulture ambassador. We've had her for 10 years. She came to us as a fledgling. We suspect she'd been poisoned in the national park. And so Chris, our vet, nursed her back to health. And then on x-ray, he realized if you see her left wing, it's lower than her right. He found out that he thought it was initially broken. It was not. It's actually deformed. So we suspect when she was a chick, due to toxins, didn't grow properly, so she cannot fly. So unfortunately, she's unable to be released. And because she's a critically endangered whiteback vulture, National Parks asked us to take her on as a wildlife ambassador. So she is quite imprinted on our rescue and rehab guys, but she's a great educational tool, especially with the school children, and we have the pleasure of her company for another 40 years. So as the Trust looks ahead into 2024, we are looking at a couple of new projects. We recognize that sometimes in Africa, we're a little bit behind the times to adopt new technologies, and I mentioned earlier the vultures and using AI on being able to identify some of the large clusters. We're also looking at using technology to help us with anti-poaching and security, and we're really excited. These are actually 2 different projects. This is Zambezi National Park. So this is Victoria Falls here, and if you look west going towards, this is Botswana, this is the national park. And so we're looking at using technology to try and secure the park. National parks obviously have a shortage of resources and manpower, and so in order to be more effective, there's a range of tools of technologies from Earth Ranger and SMART that we're able to try and deploy to be able to secure, especially along the river, to be more effective. So it's one of our efforts with national parks to try and help them out. And the other project is working with the National Parks Investigations Unit to develop a wildlife crime database. For Zimbabwe, one does not currently exist. So we will use some software that's been kindly given, a license has been given to us to develop the crime database together with national parks and to work with our cross-border collaborators on some of the investigations of syndicates that might have transboundary crime that move between the 2 countries, since our neighbor is very close. So I just want to end and say thank you all so very much for coming tonight. If you'd like to connect with us, we have a range of tools you can do so. Tracy, I think, has got a whole bunch of brochures and information outside if you want. And at this time, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand and I'll do my best to answer.
The mic so that we can get it recorded.
Is there one nationality that does more poaching than others? I guess I'm thinking of some Americans who have put their pictures on Facebook with their foot on a dead elephant or some animal they killed. How is there a composite poacher? Is it mostly Africans who are poaching their own animals?
Okay, so poaching exists on a couple of different levels. So you have what we call subsistence poaching, which is Africans poaching for the pot, right? They're trying to feed their family. So it's an impala or birds that they're going to cook. Then you've got commercial poaching. So that's, say, rhino for a horn or ivory. So that involves usually multiple layers of people. So you have source markets, which are African driven, so for us, it's the poachers will often be African, and then demand markets, and those vary, but primarily our demand markets for wildlife products are generally in Asia.
Any other questions? Raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic.
Do the elephants attack people?
Yes, elephants
Yes.
will attack people if, well, like
If they
all
just get too close and they feel threatened or something?
yeah,
I mean,
so like all species, from snakes to most mammal species, everything has a danger zone, and then it goes out from there. So if you have an animal that's injured, that danger zone is going to be, closer. Especially if you have a snared animal, if you have an animal that is feeding somewhere and you disturb it, especially with the baby, that you're going to have a problem. And being Vic Falls, a high tourism destination, some people don't always respect some of those zones.
Absolutely.
We receive no funding from the African government.
What about the United States government?
We have had a grant from USAID a few years ago. It is over.
And if you'd like more information about the Victoria Falls Wildlife Trust, Wendy Potter will have a clipboard at the back. You can leave your name and address. And so Tracy and Jessica can have that to mail you any information also that you might want to learn more about it. Any other questions? We just thank so much Tracy and Jessica. That's a wonderful presentation. So involved to all of the things you are doing. And we want to thank John Hines for inviting you all here, because we wouldn't have had this opportunity to do this and for you to listen to this great talk. Yes, sir, you have one question? Yes.
You know, I probably know the majority of everybody in here. And y'all know that I hunt and go over there a lot. I'm somewhat aware of this organization, don't know them well, but I do know what I do know about them is they're sincere and the money goes to the right places. Way too often, there are too many NGOs that are out there that are raising money for the fact of raising money, and it just does not get to where it needs to be needed. So I would say support these folks if you certainly you can, but anytime that you are so inclined to, whether it's in this country or Africa or anywhere else, do your homework and make sure that your money and your funds are going to the right people for the right reasons. So that's we see that even in North Carolina. There are people that are soliciting funds for wildlife that very few pennies of that dollar winds up where the people think the donors are it's going. So just be keenly aware of where you send your money.
Thank you for that. Thank you all for coming. Any other last questions or comments before we head out to dinner? We appreciate you joining us during this Christmas season when everything is so busy. So I hope you all have happy holidays. And again, we thank you all so much for this.
Thank you.